The fighting pits of Station Cora 7 had seen warriors from across the galaxy, creatures of claw and fang and armor and venom. But none had ever achieved what Rex Athen had achieved in his 400 years of life. He was a Mordecai, a species feared throughout known space. And he stood 9 feet tall with skin like black volcanic glass that could turn aside blades and stop bullets cold. His forearms ended in claws that could punch through steel plating. And his eyes, all 6 of them, processed visual information 3 times faster than most sentient beings in the galaxy. This meant that fighting him was like fighting someone who could see the future of Rexathan. His opponents moved in slow motion, their attacks telegraphed so clearly that he could read them like words on a page. In 412 official matches spanning 60 years of competition, no opponent had ever landed a single blow on his body, not one strike, not one scratch, not one touch. That he had not allowed the betting houses on Cora 7 had long since stopped taking wagers on whether Rex Athen would win his matches, because the answer was always the same. Now they only accepted bets on how long his opponents would survive before they submitted or died in the pit. The average time was 14 seconds. The longest any opponent had lasted was 3 minutes. And that had been a Kilrathi berserker who had pumped himself full of combat drugs and simply refused to fall until his 3 hearts burst from the strain. Rex Athen had not even been breathing hard after that fight. The galaxy knew him as the undefeated, the untouched. The perfect warrior songs were sung about him on 100 worlds. Young warriors of every species grew up watching recordings of his matches, studying his movements, dreaming of one day challenging him and failing gloriously, because even to lose to Rex Athen was considered an honor, to step into the pit with perfection itself and survive. For even a few seconds was enough to make a reputation. This was the state of things. When the human delegation arrived at Station Cora 7, humans were new to the galactic community, having only achieved faster than light travel within the last century. Most species viewed them as curiosities, soft, fragile creatures from a world that should have killed them 1,000 times over Earth. Was classified as a Class 12 death world, a planet where the very environment seemed designed to murder anything that lived there. Extreme temperatures, predators on every continent, natural disasters, diseases that evolved faster than medicine could cure them, and worst of all, other humans. The fact that humanity had survived long enough to reach the stars was considered either a miracle or a mistake. Depending on who you asked, they had no natural armor like the Mordecai, had no claws or fangs worth mentioning. They could not see in the dark or breathe underwater or survive in vacuum by every objective measure. They were one of the weakest sentient species in the known galaxy, but they had something else. They had a confidence that bordered on insanity, a refusal to accept their place in the natural order that other species found either inspiring or infuriating. So, when a human stepped forward and formally requested a bout with Rex Athen, the fight masters laughed so hard that several of them had to be treated for respiratory distress. The human did not seem bothered by their laughter. He simply waited until they were finished and then repeated his request. His name was Marcus Cole, and he was not an impressive specimen, even by human standards. He stood about average height for his species, with a lean build that spoke of efficiency rather than strength. His face bore the evidence of violence, a pain, nose that had clearly been broken multiple times, scar tissue around his eyes, a jaw that sat slightly crooked from an old fracture that had healed wrong. He was 43 years old, which was middle-aged for a human. His official record listed him as a former sergeant in something called the United Earth Marine Corps, dishonorably discharged for reasons that remain classified currently, unemployed currently, homeless currently, requesting permission to fight the greatest warrior the galaxy had ever produced the fight masters, eventually stopped laughing and tried to explain to this strange creature exactly what he was asking for. They showed him recordings of Rex Athens matches. They showed him the medical reports of survivors, the death certificates of those who had not survived. They explained in very simple terms that the human body could not withstand even a single blow from a Mordecai warrior, that his bones would shatter like glass, that his organs would rupture, that he would die in agony and there would not be enough left of him to send home to his family. Marcus Cole watched the recordings with interest. He read the medical reports without expression, and then he signed the waiver and asked when the fight would be scheduled. Word spread quickly through the station, and then through the sector, and then through the galaxy. A human was going to fight. Rex Athena human was going to die. It would be educational. The commentators said it would be a reminder of the natural order of things, a demonstration of why some species ruled the galaxy and others served them tickets. Sold out within hours. Observers came from across 3 sectors: diplomats and crime lords and military strategists and scientists who wanted to study human anatomy under extreme stress. The Mordecai embassy sent a formal representative to witness what they called the correction of human arrogance. Through all of this, Marcus Cole said nothing to the press. He gave no interviews. He made no predictions. He simply trained in a private facility that the human delegation had arranged for him, a converted cargo bay in the lower levels of the station where no outside observers were permitted. Frexon, for his part, found himself experiencing something he had not felt in decades. He was curious, not worried. The idea of worrying about a human opponent was absurd, but curious about what would drive a creature to seek its own destruction with such determination. On the night before the match, he accessed the human service record. What little of it was available to the public, the human had fought in 3 wars on his homeworld, and 2 more in space since humanity had joined the galactic community. He had killed members of his own species and members of other species. He had been captured and tortured and had escaped, had been declared dead twice and had failed to stay that weave. Rex Ethan read all of this and felt something shift in his ancient mind. Not fervent respect, just a small voice that whispered a question he had not asked himself in 60 years. What if this time is different? He silenced the voice immediately. Nothing was different. Nothing would ever be different. He was the undefeated, the untouched, the perfect warrior, and tomorrow he would add one more victory to his record, just like always. In the lower levels of Station Korath 7, far from the glittering observation decks and luxury suites where wealthy aliens were placing bets on how quickly the human would die, Marcus Cole sat alone in the darkness and watched his enemy fight. The cargo bay had been converted into something like a command center, with screens covering every wall, each one displaying a different recording of Rex Athen in combat. The Mordecai champion moved like liquid death across the displays, his forearms striking with precision that bordered on autistic, his body flowing from one killing position to the next without pause or hesitation. Cole had watched these recordings 412 times. Once for every match the champion had won. He had memorized every movement, every stance, every tiny shift of weight that preceded a strike. He knew Rexacin's fighting style better than Rexacin himself knew it, and that was exactly the problem. The door behind him hissed open, and Cole did not turn around because he already knew who it was. Kira Okonkwo moved quietly for someone who spent most of her time in diplomatic functions. But Cole had been trained to notice things that other people missed. She was the unofficial attached to Earth's ambassador on the station, which meant she did the work that ambassadors could not be seen doing officially. The diplomatic corps had condemned Cole's challenge as reckless and foolish, a stunt that would set back human integration into galactic society by decades, unofficially. They had given Kira a data chip containing every piece of classified research on Mordecai biology that human scientists had ever compiled. She placed the chip on the console next to Cole and stood beside him, watching the screens. "You know they expect you to die tomorrow," she said. "I know." Cole replied without looking away from the footage. The ambassador received 17 formal communications today from various alien governments expressing their condolences in advance. That was considerate of them. Kira was silent for a moment, studying the man beside her. She had read his file, the classified version that contained things the public record did not mention. She knew about the black operations, the assassinations, the years he had spent hunting the most dangerous creatures humanity had ever encountered, which were, of course, other humans. "What are you looking for?" She finally asked the wrong thing. She frowned at this answer. But Cole continued before she could ask for clarification. "Everyone who fights Rexathan makes the same mistake. And they make it before they ever step into the pit." He gestured at the screens, where a dozen different aliens were being systematically destroyed by the Mordecai champion. They study him like I'm studying him right now. And they learn everything there is to know about how he fights. And then they walk into that arena thinking they understand him. And they do not. They understand his techniques, Cole said, finally turning to look at her. But they do not understand his assumptions. And those assumptions are what will kill him. Kira crossed her arms, waiting for him to explain. Every species in this galaxy evolved on a different world with different pressures and different survival strategies. But when they learned to fight, they all learned the same basic lesson. You threaten before you attack. He pulled up a recording of a Theshan warrior facing Rexathan, freezing it at the moment before the Theshan launched his first strike. Look at him. See how his muscles tense? See how his weight shifts? See how his eyes focus on his target half a second before he moves. He's preparing to attack. He's announcing that he is about to attack. And every species does this because it made evolutionary sense. Cole advanced the recording frame by frame, showing the Theshan's body gathering itself for violence. On most worlds, predators develop threat displays to avoid unnecessary fights, because fighting is expensive in terms of energy and risk of injury. So creatures learn to posture and intimidate and signal their intentions before committing to actual combat. And this is universal among every species humanity has encountered. Yes, they all telegraph their attacks to some degree because that behavior is written into their genetic code. Kira began to understand what he was suggesting. But humans evolved on a world where the most dangerous predator was another human, Cole finished. And humans learned very early that announcing your intentions to another human was a good way to get killed. So we developed something different. He closed the recordings and turned to face her fully. We developed deception as our primary survival strategy. Not just hiding or camouflage, but active manipulation of what our opponents expect us to do. You are saying humans do not telegraph their attacks. I am saying humans are the only species in the known galaxy that evolved specifically to hide their intentions from creatures as intelligent as themselves. Cole began unwrapping the cloth from his hands, revealing knuckles covered in calluses and scar tissue. Rexathan processes visual information 3 times faster than I do, which means he can see my movements before other species could see them. But seeing is not the same as understanding. What do you mean? His brain is optimized for recognizing patterns, for identifying threat displays and combat postures and attack signatures. But those recognition systems were trained on aliens who fight like aliens. He rewrapped his hands with fresh cloth, this time adding something to the wrapping of fine powder that glittered in the dim light. They have never encountered a species that attacks without warning, that strikes without posturing, that can go from standing peacefully to killing in 0 time with no transition. You think you can surprise him. I think his brain will see what I am doing and refuse to believe it because it will not match any pattern he has ever encountered. And in the moment it takes him to process something impossible, I will already be moving. Kira watched him finish his preparations. This strange and dangerous man who spoke about killing the galaxy's greatest warrior, as if he were discussing a mathematical equation. You have done this before, she said quietly. Surprised opponents who should have been able to stop you. Many times. Against humans. Against humans. Yes, and against other things. He stood, rolling his shoulders, testing his movement. The universe is full of creatures that are faster and stronger and more deadly than humans. But none of them evolved to fight something as treacherous as another human being. And that is our advantage. That we are treacherous, Cole smiled. And it was not a pleasant expression. That we are the best liars in the galaxy. And tomorrow I am going to tell Rex Athan the most convincing lie ever told. What lie is that? He picked up a simple jacket and pulled it on, hiding the warrior beneath the appearance of an ordinary man. That I am not a threat. He walked toward the door, then paused. The odds against me are currently 8,000 to 1, which means if you bet everything you have on me winning, you will be able to buy your own starship when this is over. That is not why I'm helping you. I know, Cole said, but you should do it anyway. He left her standing in the cargo bay, surrounded by screens full of violence. And she found herself wondering if she had just witnessed the preparations of a dead man or the calm confidence of a predator that the galaxy had badly underestimated. She pulled out her personal communicator and began transferring funds. 8,000 to 1 was very good odds. The fighting pit of Station Kara 7 was carved from the heart of the original asteroid. A perfect circle of black stone 50 meters across and polished smooth by centuries of blood and violence. Tiers of seating rose around it like the inside of a bowl, climbing upward until they disappeared into the haze of atmospheric lighting that made the arena feel like a temple dedicated to some ancient god of war. 50,000 beings had packed themselves into those seats, representatives of hundreds of species who had traveled from across the galaxy to witness what they all believed would be a historic moment, the death of human arrogance. Some called it a correction. Others cited a lesson that needed to be taught. The atmosphere in the arena was unlike anything the old veterans could remember. A strange mixture of anticipation and something that might have been nervousness. Though no one would admit to feeling nervous about the outcome of such an obvious mismatched. Giant holographic displays floated above the pit, showing statistics and odds and biographical information about the two fighters. Rex's display was a monument to perfection. 412 victories, 0 defeats, 0 touches received, average fight duration of 14 seconds. The humans' display was almost embarrassingly sparse. No official fighting record in galactic competition. Former military service, current status listed simply as civilian in the private viewing boxes that ringed the upper levels. Diplomats and power brokers were making deals and placing final bets. The Mordecai ambassador sat with perfect stillness, his face unreadable, watching the pit below with all 6 eyes. The human ambassador was conspicuously absent, having issued a statement declaring that the diplomatic corps did not endorse this event and would not be represented in her place. Sitting alone in a box that should have held a dozen officials, Kira Okonkwo watched the empty arena floor and tried to slow her heartbeat. She had bet everything, not just money, but reputation, career, and the small hope she had allowed herself to feel that maybe, just maybe, the galaxy was about to learn something important about humanity. The ritual drums began to sound, a deep pulsing rhythm that had announced combat on Korath for thousands of years. The crowd fell silent from the eastern gate. A shadow emerged. Rexathan walked into the light like a god descending from mythology, his black carapace gleaming with oils that had been applied by his attendants, his forearms held loosely at his sides, his 6 eyes scanning the crowd with casual indifference. He wore no weapons because he needed none. He wore no armor beyond his own skin because nothing in the galaxy could pierce. He was perfect in his lethality, beautiful in his deadliness, and the crowd responded with a roar that shook the ancient stone. He acknowledged them with a slight raising of his upper arms, the gesture of a king accepting tribute. And then he turned to face the western gate and waited. The drums continued their rhythm. The crowd's cheering faded into whispers and then into silence. The western gate remained closed. 1 second passed. Then 5, then 10. The whispers started again, speculating, had the human fled? Had he come to his senses? Had fear finally overcome whatever madness had driven him to this moment? And then the gate opened. Marcus Cole walked into the arena alone. He wore simple clothes, loose pants and a wrapped shirt in dark fabric that offered no protection whatsoever. His hands were wrapped in cloth, the traditional binding used by human fighters to protect their knuckles, and his feet were bare against the cold stone. He did not acknowledge the crowd. He did not look up at the holographic displays or the private boxes or the thousands of eyes that watched him. He simply walked to the center of the pit with the steady pace of a man going to work, stopped when he reached the proper distance from his opponent, and waited. The contrast between them was almost comical. Rex then towered over the human, more than twice his height, 4 times his mass, armed with claws that could gut an armored vehicle. Cole looked like someone's father, ordinary and unremarkable, the kind of man you would pass on a street without a second glance. The crowd began to laugh first, one section, then another, the sound spreading through the arena like a wave until 50,000 beings were howling with amusement at the absurdity of what they were witnessing. Cole did not react. He simply stood there, his hands relaxed at his sides, his eyes fixed on the Mordecai champion with an expression of mild interest. Rex Athen studied the human with genuine curiosity. He had fought creatures of every shape and size, warriors who came to him filled with rage or fear or determination, but he had never seen anything quite like the calm that radiated from this small, soft creature. There was no tension in the human's body, no coiled energy waiting to be released, no subtle signs of the fight-or-flight response that every sentient being experienced when facing death. He looked. Rex Athen realized with something approaching surprise. Completely relaxed, the ritual master stepped forward, an elderly Corvian whose job had been to officiate these matches for 60 years. His BR's voice echoed through the arena as he recited the traditional words, calling on the fighters to honor the ancient codes, to give their best in combat, to accept whatever fate the match would bring. Neither fighter seemed to be listening. They were watching each other. Rex Athen was trying to read the human, trying to find some hint of strategy or intention in his stance, and finding nothing but emptiness. Cole was watching the Mordecai's eyes, tracking which set was focused on him, noting the subtle patterns of his attention. The ritual master finished his recitation and called for the traditional touching of appendages, the gesture of respect that began every match. Rex Athen extended his lower right arm, the claw opening slightly in the formal position. Cole stepped forward. He raised his hand. The arena held its breath. Their appendages moved toward each other, the massive claw and the small soft hand. And in that moment, the universe balanced on the edge of something unprecedented. They touched, and everything changed. The human's hand did not clasp the offered claw, it redirected it. A tiny movement that used the Mordecai's own momentum to push the arm slightly off-center in the same instant. In the same breath, in a motion so fast that Rex Athen's enhanced perception barely registered it as movement at all. The human's other hand shot forward. It struck the soft tissue between 2 carapace plates on Rex Athen's lower thorax. The sound it made was like nothing the arena had ever heard it crack. A crunch, A wet impact that echoed in the sudden silence. Rexathan felt pain, real pain. For the first time in 60 years, the crowd did not cheer, the crowd did not gasp. The crowd simply stopped, frozen in collective disbelief at what they had just witnessed, and Marcus Cole was already moving again. The first strike had landed before Rexathan's brain could process that the fight had begun. His mind, that magnificent engine that processed information 3 times faster than most sentient beings, was still caught in the ritual of the greeting when pain erupted in his lower thorax. The human's knuckles, wrapped in cloth that contained powdered ceramic harder than diamond, had found the soft tissue between his armor plates with surgical precision. One Rexathan's combat algorithms crashed. This was not metaphor, but a literal description of what happened inside his neural architecture. His brain had been trained over 400 years to recognize the patterns of combat, to identify threat displays and attack signatures, to predict enemy movements based on a library of information gathered from every fight he had ever witnessed or participated in. But there was no pattern for what the human was doing. There was no threat display, no telegraph, no transition from peaceful stance to violent action. One moment, the human had been reaching out in the traditional gesture of respect, and the next moment he had struck with force that should have been impossible for his small body. Rexathan's brain tried to find a match for this behavior and found nothing. It tried again and found nothing. It ran through its entire database of combat knowledge in a fraction of a second and came up empty. And in that fraction of a second, while his mind scrambled to understand the impossible, the human moved again. Cole stepped into the Mordecai's guard, so close that the champion's long arms became liabilities rather than weapons. His elbow drove upward into the nerve cluster behind Rexathan's primary arm joint, a spot that human xenobiologists had identified as one of only 7 vulnerable points on the Mordecai body. 2 Rexathan's right arms went numb from shoulder to claw. 60 years of unbroken dominance had not prepared him for pain, had not prepared him for the sensation of his own body betraying him, had not prepared him for the sight of a creature half his size moving through his defenses like they did not exist. His brain finally caught up combat. His neural architecture screamed attack. It demanded defend. It pleaded, but the human was no longer where he had been. Cole had not retreated after his strikes, which was what every opponent Rexathan had ever faced would have done. He had pressed forward, deeper into the danger zone, operating on the principle that the safest place to be when fighting a larger opponent was so close that they could not bring their weapons to bear. His palm shot upward. It connected with the delicate sensory organs clustered on Rexathan's lower face, the organs that allowed the Mordecai to smell fear and taste the chemical signatures of weakness in their prey. The impact shattered them. 3. The crowd had begun to make noise again, but it was not the roar of excitement they had planned to unleash. When their champion claimed another victory, it was something else entirely. It was shock. It was disbelief. It was the sound of 50,000 beings, watching their understanding of the universe crumble in real time. Rexathan staggered. He had never staggered. He had never retreated. He had never felt his body respond to combat with anything other than perfect lethal grace. His remaining functional arms swept through the air in a desperate arc, claws extended, moving at speeds that would have bisected any normal opponent into wet red pieces. But Cole was not a normal opponent. Cole had already dropped low, his body moving with a fluidity that suggested he had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his mind. And his leg swept out in a strike that targeted the joint where Rexathan's primary locomotion limbs met his body. This was another vulnerability. Point a spot that was supposed to be protected by the champion's fighting stance, but Rexathan was no longer In his fighting stance, he was staggering and blind and in pain, and his positioning had collapsed into something an old human marine with 40 years of combat experience could read like a children's book. The kick connected with perfect accuracy. 4. Rex Athen's leg buckled. The champion of Station Car 7, the undefeated, the untouched, the perfect warrior, fell to one knee for the first time in 412 fights, and as he fell, Cole rose. The movement was continuous. A single flowing action that started with the low sweep and ended with the human's entire body rotating upward, channeling momentum from his legs through his hips, through his shoulders into his fist. The target was Rex Athen's throat on the Mordecai homeworld. This species had evolved as ambush predators who needed flexible necks to hunt prey in dense vegetation. This meant that their throats remained soft, protected only by the fighting stances that kept their chins tucked and their vulnerable areas turned away from opponents. But Rex Athen's chin was not tucked. His head was thrown back from the impact to his sensory organs. His throat exposed, and Cole's fist drove into that soft flesh with the force of a human being who had spent his entire life learning how to kill things that were bigger and stronger and faster than himself. 5. Rex Athen hit the ground, the sound of his armored body striking the ancient stone echoed through an arena that had gone completely silent. 50,000 beings had stopped breathing. 50,000 beings were staring at the impossible sight of the greatest warrior their civilization had ever produced lying on his back, struggling to breathe through a damaged throat, his body racked with pain from wounds that should not exist. Cole stood over him. He was not breathing hard. His expression had not changed from the mild interest he had worn when he first entered the arena. He looked down at the fallen champion the way a craftsman might look at a project that had turned out exactly as planned, with satisfaction but no particular emotion. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly through the silence, picked up by the microphones that had been placed throughout the pit to capture every sound of combat. "You process fast," he said, "but processing is not reacting." Rex Athen stared up at him with 4 functional eyes, 2 of them still trying to clear the damage from the palm strike. "Your brain saw everything I was doing," Cole continued. "Every movement, every strike, every shift of weight. But it could not believe what it was seeing because it did not match anything in your experience." He took a step back, giving the champion room to rise. "If he could, you have spent 60 years fighting people who fight the way you expect them to fight. Beings who telegraph their intentions, who follow the patterns their evolution gave them, who announce their attacks before they make them." Rex Athen pushed himself up on his remaining functional arms, his body trembling with effort. "You have never fought someone who does not care about your expectations." Cole turned and walked toward the western gate, not looking back at the opponent he had just destroyed behind him. Rex Athen finally managed to rise to his knees and then to his feet, standing unsteadily in the center of the pit while 50,000 beings watched in stunned silence. The fight was not officially over. The ritual master had not called an end. Rex Athen could technically continue, could gather himself and charge after the retreating human and try to salvage something from this disaster. But he did not move. He stood there, swaying slightly, and watched the small, soft creature walk away from him with the casual confidence of someone who had never been in any danger at all. The human stopped at the gate and turned back. "Just for a moment. 5 strikes," he said, and I was being gentle. Then he was gone, disappearing into the shadows of the tunnel, leaving behind an arena full of beings who would never look at humanity the same way again. The silence lasted for 30 seconds. Then the Mordecai ambassador rose from his private box and walked out without a word, his face unreadable, but his movements carrying the weight of a civilization that had just received a message. they were not prepared to hear in their box. Kira Okonkwo was crying. She was not entirely sure why. The official recordings of the match would be analyzed by military strategists and combat scholars for decades. Studied frame by frame, dissected and debated and theorized about. But the truth of what had happened was simple. A human had walked into the most famous fighting pit in the galaxy. He had faced the most undefeatable warrior any civilization had ever produced, and he had hit him 5 times before the warrior even realized the fight had begun. The galaxy was about to become a very different place. The aftermath of the match sent tremors through galactic civilization that would be felt for generations within hours. Every military organization in known space had requested copies of the fight recordings, and within days those recordings had been watched more times than any other piece of media, and galactic history analysts wrote papers. Generals revised their assessment of human combat capabilities. Diplomats who had treated human representatives with polite condescension suddenly found themselves being much more careful about their tone. Trade agreements that had been stalled for years were suddenly reopened with terms far more favorable to Earth. The message had been received. Humans were not the soft, weak creatures the galaxy had assumed them to be. They were something else entirely, something that the comfortable hierarchies of galactic power had not accounted for. And everyone was scrambling to understand what that meant. But Marcus Cole did not care about any of this. 3 days after the match, he walked through the corridors of the station's medical district, past guards who recognized him and stepped aside without being asked, until he reached a private recovery suite that had been reserved for those who could afford discretion. The door opened at his approach. Vrexithan lay on a platform designed for Mordecai anatomy, his massive body still showing the evidence of their encounter bandages where his sensory organs had been damaged. A brace supporting his throat, his right arm still immobilized while the nerve damage healed. The champion looked at the human who had defeated him, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "You should not be here," Vrexithan finally said, his voice rough and strange through his damaged throat. "I know," Cole replied, pulling up a chair designed for smaller species and sitting down, deliberately putting himself lower than the Mordecai. "But I came to explain something because I think you deserve to understand." "Understand what?" Vrexithan's eyes, the 4 that were still functional, fixed on him with an intensity that might have intimidated anyone who had not just beaten him in combat. "That I was weak, that I was slow, that I was complacent? No." Cole leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "You were alone." The champion was silent, waiting for the human to continue. "For 60 years, you were the best," Cole said. "And that sounds like a good thing. But it was actually the worst thing that could have happened to you." "Explain." "No one challenged you." "Not really. Not in a way that forced you to grow. And so you stopped growing." Cole gestured at the medical equipment surrounding them. "At they evidence of the champion's defeat. You won so completely and so consistently that you never had to adapt, never had to learn, never had to face the possibility that you might be wrong about something. And humans are different. Humans spend every moment of every day surrounded by creatures exactly as clever and exactly as vicious and exactly as adaptable as themselves." Cole's expression was serious but not unkind. "We cannot afford to stop improving because the moment we do, one of our own will find our weakness and exploit it. And we learn from a very young age that the universe does not care about our past victories." "You are saying that your species is more dangerous because you fight each other. I am saying that I did not beat you because I am stronger or faster. Because I am obviously neither of those things." He met the champion's gaze directly. "I beat you because I've been beaten 1,000 times before, and every single loss taught me something, and you have never had that teacher." Vrexithan was quiet for a long moment, processing this. His species lived for centuries, and he had spent 4 of those centuries building a legend of invincibility that had just been shattered by a creature who should not have been able to touch him. The easy path would be to dismiss this as a fluke, to blame his defeat on some technicality, to retreat into denial and pretend that nothing had really changed. But Vrexathan had not become the greatest warrior of his generation by taking the easy path. "Why tell me this?" he asked. "You have proven human superiority. You have humiliated me in front of the entire galaxy. Why give away the secret that made your victory possible?" Cole smiled, and for the first time since Vrexathan had met him, it looked like a genuine expression of warmth. "Because I do not want superiority," he said. "I want competition." He stood, moving toward the door. "You are 400 years old, which means you probably have another 400 years ahead of you, maybe more. And imagine what you could become if you spent those years learning from your defeats instead of just accumulating victories. You want me to lose more. I want you to grow more. And sometimes those are the same thing." Cole paused at the door, turning back to look at the fallen champion one more time. "Humans have a saying that we teach to our warriors from the very first day of training. Iron sharpens iron." He let the words hang in the air for a moment. "You have been surrounded by copper your whole life, softer metals that could never challenge you. And now you have met iron." His eyes held something that might have been respect. "Sharpen yourself." Then he was gone, leaving Vrexathan alone with his injuries and his thoughts and a question that would haunt him for the rest of his very long life. What could he become if he stopped trying to be invincible and started trying to be better 20 years later? The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. Human combat instructors were in demand on 100 worlds, teaching techniques that defied conventional understanding of how fighting was supposed to work cross-species. Martial arts had become a field of serious academic study, with universities offering degrees in comparative combat methodology and in the fighting pits of Station Korath 7. A new legend had emerged. They called him Vrexathan the Reborn. In the 2 decades since his defeat at human hands, he had fought 359 matches. He had lost 47 of them, and each loss had made him stronger. He had studied under human teachers, learning their philosophy of continuous improvement, their refusal to accept limitations, their strange belief that failure was not something to be avoided, but something to be embraced. He had fought opponents who used techniques he had never seen, and instead of destroying them quickly, he had let them challenge him, let them push him, let them teach him things that victory never could. His fighting style had evolved into something unprecedented, a fusion of Mordecai power and human adaptability that other warriors studied and tried to imitate. He was no longer the undefeated. He was something better. He was a warrior who understood that perfection was not a destination but a journey, and that the journey never ended as long as you were willing to keep learning. On the night of his 360th match, Vrexathan stood in the center of the pit and looked up at the crowd that filled the ancient arena. 50,000 beings watched him, cheering not for the legend of his invincibility, but for the example of his transformation. And there, in a private box near the top of the arena, sat an older human man with gray in his hair and new scars on his face that had not been there 20 years ago. Marcus Cole watched his former opponent raise 4 arms to the crowd. Watched the joy in the Mordecai's movement. Watched the confidence that came not from never losing, but from knowing that losing could not break him. When Vrexathan's eyes found the human in the crowd, something passed between them, nod of acknowledgement, recognition of the bond that exists between warriors who have tested each other and found each other worthy. Iron had found iron. Both of them were sharper for it. Cole smiled and raised his hand in a small salute. 20 years ago, he had walked into this arena to teach the galaxy a lesson about humanity. He had not expected to learn a lesson himself, but watching Vrexathan the Reborn prepare for another fight, watching the joy of a warrior who had discovered that defeat was just another word for opportunity, Cole understood something important. Greatest victory was not the one you won in the pit. It was the one you won in yourself, and that victory belonged to both of them. The drums began to sound, the crowd fell silent, and somewhere in the galaxy, in training halls and military academies and fighting pits on 1,000 worlds, humans and aliens were learning from each other, challenging each other, sharpening each other. The universe was changing, and it was only the beginning.